New York. New York stands at the top of the list for documented serial killers in the United States, with 18 individuals associated with the state and a total of 677 known victims. While these numbers can seem shocking at first glance, they align with broader sociological patterns. New York has one of the largest and densest populations in the country, historically complex policing jurisdictions, and a long period from the late 1960s through the 1980s marked by economic strain, rising crime rates, and limited investigative resources. All of these dynamics created an environment where serial offenders could operate before detection systems improved. Among New York's cases, none is more widely recognized than David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam. Between 1976 and 1977, Berkowitz carried out a series of shootings that took 6 lives and wounded 11 others. His attacks occurred during a time of heightened fear in New York City, when public confidence in law enforcement was already strained by financial instability and rising violent crime. Berkowitz's taunting letters sent to police and the media deepened public anxiety and cemented the case as one of the earliest modern examples of a serial offender using media attention as part of his methodology. His eventual capture, following a parking ticket trail, demonstrated the importance of interdepartmental coordination and behavioral analysis. Beyond Berkowitz, New York has been linked to several other offenders whose cases contributed to the evolving study of serial criminal behavior. Richard Angelo, a nurse who poisoned hospital patients in the 1980s, brought renewed scrutiny to medical oversight and the phenomenon known as angel of death offenders, individuals who exploit caregiving roles to harm vulnerable populations. Paul Bateson, a radiology technician, was convicted of a 1977 murder and suspected in a series of unsolved homicides in Manhattan's LGBTQ+ community. Joseph G. Christopher, dubbed the Midtown Slasher, targeted individuals across racial lines, revealing intersections between mental illness, social instability, and unpredictable violence. New York's history with serial offenders tells a broader story about the evolution of law enforcement techniques. During the 1970s and 1980s, police departments lacked the integrated databases, forensic tools, and communication structures that today are standard across jurisdictions. Cases like Berkowitz and Christopher exposed vulnerabilities in pattern recognition and interagency collaboration. These challenges eventually pushed New York and the country as a whole toward more modernized investigative frameworks, including behavioral profiling, centralized data management, and enhanced forensic science. Today, New York's legacy of high-profile cases is not merely a catalog of crimes, but a record of how the state's policing, forensic analysis, and public safety strategies developed in response to complex criminal behavior. The state's experience underscores how population density, media culture, and social pressures can shape both crime and investigation. California. California ranks second in the number of documented serial killers, yet it stands dramatically apart in total victims. More than 1,770, nearly double the count of any other state. This disparity reflects several structural and historical factors. California's population is the largest in the country. Its geography spreads across vast metropolitan centers, and for decades, its law enforcement agencies operated under highly fragmented jurisdictional boundaries. Before the advancement of integrated databases, this decentralization made it difficult for investigators to link crimes occurring in different counties or cities. As a result, several offenders were able to commit repeated acts without early detection. Among the most notorious cases associated with California is the Zodiac Killer. Active primarily between 1968 and 1969, the Zodiac carried out attacks in Northern California and injected himself into public consciousness by sending coded letters and manifestos to newspapers. Although he claimed responsibility for 37 murders, only 7 victims, 5 fatalities and 2 survivors have been definitively attributed to him. The case remains unsolved, and its complexity illustrated the limitations of pre-digital era investigative work. Competing county jurisdictions, lack of centralized behavioral analysis, and the absence of modern forensic technologies contributed to the Zodiac's ability to elude identification. California is also home to offenders whose crimes directly shaped national investigative practices. Kenneth Bianchi, one half of the duo known as the Hillside Stranglers, participated in a series of murders in Los Angeles during the late 1970s. The case underscored the challenges of identifying team offenders, pairs, or groups who commit coordinated crimes and influence the development of offender typologies in behavioral science. Likewise, Richard Ramirez, referred to as the Night Stalker, carried out a highly publicized string of assaults and murders across Southern California in the mid-1980s. His crimes involved varied methods and target profiles, complicating early investigative efforts. However, his eventual identification through a fingerprint match highlighted the growing importance of forensic databases and cross-agency information sharing. California's broader history with serial offenders also reflects its cultural and demographic landscape. The state's rapid growth during the mid-20th century, combined with expansive suburbanization, created environments where anonymity was easy to maintain. Furthermore, its extensive highway systems and high internal mobility enabled offenders to operate over a wide geographic area. These conditions, coupled with the era's evolving policing structures, contributed to the elevated victim count. Over time, California's complex criminal cases pushed law enforcement towards standardized communication, forensic innovation, and coordinated task forces. The lessons learned from the Zodiac, the Hillside Stranglers, Ramirez, and others led to the creation of more cohesive investigative strategies that would later influence national practice. Texas ranks third in total serial killer victims, with approximately 948 documented fatalities linked to 8 known offenders. The state's geographical expanse, diverse population centers, and extensive transportation networks have historically played a role in shaping patterns of criminal activity. Large rural areas, combined with major urban clusters such as Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio, create environments where offenders can move with relative ease. Furthermore, Texas's extensive freight rail infrastructure and interstate highways have facilitated mobility for transient criminals, a factor that has appeared repeatedly in cases from the 1970s through the early 2000s. Among Texas's most disturbing historical cases is that of Janine Jones, often referred to as the Angel of Death. As a pediatric nurse in the early 1980s, Jones exploited her position to harm infants and young children under her care. She administered lethal or near-lethal doses of drugs that induced cardiac arrest or respiratory failure, a method that initially concealed the true nature of the deaths. Jones's crimes exposed systemic gaps in medical oversight and accountability. Hospitals at the time lacked both the monitoring technology and reporting structures that today help detect abnormal mortality patterns. The case led to reforms in how medical institutions track patient outcomes and evaluate internal misconduct. Another high-profile offender associated with Texas is Angel Maturino Resendiz, known as the Railroad Killer. Resendiz traveled by hopping freight trains, committing murders across multiple states before retreating into Texas. His crimes highlighted the difficulties law enforcement faced when dealing with highly mobile offenders who operated across state lines. Before modern information sharing systems, investigators in different jurisdictions often worked without awareness of related cases elsewhere. Resendiz's eventual capture required coordinated efforts from federal agencies and multiple state departments, underscoring the importance of nationwide criminal intelligence networks. Texas is also linked to Dean Corll, known as the Candyman, whose crimes in the 1970s involved the abuse and murder of young boys in the Houston area. Correll's case is often studied because it involved accomplices who assisted in luring victims, demonstrating how group dynamics and coercion can play a role in serial offending. Similarly, Kenneth McDuff, nicknamed the Broomstick Killer, committed multiple murders both before and after being paroled, prompting reforms in Texas's parole system and contributing to changes in national parole evaluation standards. Texas's history with serial offenders reflects broader criminal justice developments. Many of its cases occurred during periods when forensic science and interagency communication were still evolving. Each major investigation, whether in a medical setting across multiple states or involving accomplices, challenged existing law enforcement practices and led to updated protocols. As a result, Texas's experience has shaped advancements in offender tracking, forensic analysis, and institutional accountability. Illinois ranks fourth in both the number of documented serial killers and total victims, with 7 offenders linked to approximately 600,000 fatalities. Much of this activity is concentrated around Chicago, a city whose dense population, large commuter networks, and historical periods of economic instability have long shaped its crime landscape. During the 1960s through the early 1980s, Chicago faced challenges common to many large U.S. cities: rapid urban change, policing resource constraints, and fragmented communication among law enforcement units. These conditions created investigative vulnerabilities that several offenders were able to exploit before modern forensic and data systems became standard. The most infamous offender associated with Illinois is John Wayne Gacy, often referred to as the Killer Clown, due to his occasional volunteer work performing as a clown at local events. Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys in the 1970s, many of whom he buried in the crawl space beneath his suburban Chicago home. His crimes garnered national attention not only because of their scale, but because Gacy maintained a public persona of community engagement, business ownership, and local political involvement. The case continues to be referenced in criminology education for its insights into how offenders with stable outward identities can conceal predatory behavior over extended periods. It also underscored the need for improved missing persons coordination and cross-jurisdictional data sharing. Illinois is also associated with a group known as the Chicago Rippers: Robin Gecht, Edward Spreitzer, and brothers Andrew and Thomas Corcoralis, whose crimes in the early 1980s revealed the complexities of cult-like group dynamics in serial offending. Their case drew attention to the influence of shared ideology, coercion, and group reinforcement in escalating criminal behavior. The investigation required the integration of psychological profiling, forensic evidence, and coordinated interrogation strategies, contributing to more refined methods for handling multi-offender cases. Another notable figure is William Herons, infamously nicknamed the Lipstick Killer, due to a message left at a crime scene in the mid-1940s. Though his case predates the modern era of serial offender study, it remains significant because it reflects early media involvement in crime reporting and the public's growing exposure to investigative narratives. His conviction also continues to prompt debate about the evolution of interrogation standards and the reliability of early forensic techniques. Illinois' history with serial crime highlights how offender behavior intersects with social context. High-density living, transient populations, and multiple overlapping jurisdictions have historically complicated investigative efforts. Over time, the challenges exposed by cases such as Gacy and the Chicago Rippers led to strengthened forensic infrastructure, improved interagency communication, and more robust approaches to identifying missing persons. These advancements have contributed to modern policing frameworks not only in Illinois, but across the United States. OHIO. Ohio ranks 5th on this list, with 7 documented serial killers responsible for approximately 505 known victims. While the total number of offenders is comparable to Illinois, the lower victim count shifts the state's placement. Ohio's history with serial crime reflects broader patterns common to many Midwestern regions. A mix of large urban centers like Cleveland and Columbus, smaller industrial cities, and widespread suburban and rural areas. These varied environments have created both opportunities and challenges for law enforcement, particularly during periods when investigative resources were stretched thin. One of Ohio's most notorious modern offenders is Sean Great, who committed at least 5 murders between 2006 and 2016. Great's case became widely known due to the extraordinary circumstances that led to his capture. A woman he had abducted managed to place a whispered 911 call while he slept nearby. Her ability to remain calm and communicate her approximate location allowed police to intervene quickly. When investigators entered Great's residence, they found severely unsanitary conditions and multiple decomposing bodies, revealing a pattern of escalating violence. Great's arrest demonstrated the importance of emergency response training, victim safety protocols, and rapid coordination between dispatch operators and patrol units. Ohio is also connected, historically, to the early life of Jeffrey Dahmer, though the majority of Dahmer's crimes occurred in Wisconsin. Dahmer's first murder took place in rural Ohio, providing an early example of how offenders may shift locations, complicating jurisdictional awareness. This mobility underscores the importance of tracking early behavioral indicators, although in Dahmer's era, such systems were minimal or non-existent. Other Ohio cases have highlighted issues related to vulnerable populations, transient victims, and community disengagement. Offenders who target individuals experiencing homelessness, addiction, or social isolation have historically been able to operate longer without detection. These patterns have prompted Ohio agencies to improve outreach, reporting mechanisms, and interdepartmental communication, especially in regions where resources are limited. Throughout the late 20th century, Ohio, like many states, faced challenges related to industrial decline, economic hardship, and shifting population patterns. These conditions often strained local law enforcement budgets and reduced investigative capacity. As forensic science advanced, however, Ohio agencies increasingly adopted DNA technology, centralized offender databases, and integrated communication systems. Such tools have significantly improved the ability to identify links between cases that once appeared unrelated. Ohio's experience with serial offenders provides a clear example of how geography, economic conditions, and evolving investigative capabilities shape criminal detection. The lessons drawn from cases like Sean Great's have strengthened statewide protocols around missing persons, victim response, and crime scene processing. Today, Ohio's approach reflects a more proactive and coordinated model designed to prevent offenders from exploiting gaps that once existed. Indiana ranks 6th on this list, with 6 known serial killers linked to approximately 309 victims. While the total number of offenders is comparable to other Midwestern states, Indiana's overall victim count is lower, reflecting differences in offender behavior, geographic factors, and investigative circumstances. The state's history with serial crime spans rural communities, suburban areas, and metropolitan regions such as Indianapolis and Gary, illustrating how varied environments can shape offender mobility and detection challenges. One of Indiana's most widely studied cases involves Herb Baumeister, a successful businessman who lived on an 18-acre estate known as Fox Hollow Farm. During the mid-1990s, law enforcement discovered skeletal remains from at least 11 missing young men on the property, though investigators believe the total number of victims may be higher. Baumeister fled the state and died by suicide before he could be formally charged. His case continues to be cited in behavioral science research because it highlights the phenomenon of offenders who maintain outwardly conventional lives, running businesses, raising families, and engaging in community activities while concealing predatory conduct. This duality complicates detection, as individuals who appear socially integrated often fall outside traditional risk profiles. Indiana is also historically associated with Belle Gunness, one of the most infamous female offenders in American history. Active in the early 1900s, Gunness operated on a rural farmstead in LaPorte County. She lured victims through personal advertisements and is believed to have murdered more than a dozen individuals, though exact numbers remain uncertain. Gunness's case is noteworthy because her crimes occurred during a time when record-keeping and communication between jurisdictions were limited. Many of her victims were travelers or individuals from other states, making it difficult for families and authorities to establish patterns of disappearance. Her actions illustrate how isolation, poor documentation, and limited forensic capability allowed certain offenders to operate with minimal scrutiny in earlier eras. Another significant Indiana case is that of Larry Eyler, known as the Interstate Killer. Eyler targeted young men across multiple Midwestern states, using major highways to evade detection. His crimes exposed weaknesses in cross-state coordination during the late 20th century. Investigators from Indiana, Illinois, and other neighboring states eventually collaborated to assemble a clearer picture of his movements, reflecting the increasing necessity of multi-agency task forces. More recent cases, such as those involving Darren Dion Ban, highlight ongoing challenges around vulnerable populations, transient victims, and abandoned housing, particularly in economically distressed areas. Ban's arrest in 2014 led to the discovery of several victims and raised concerns about disparities in investigative attention when victims lack strong community ties. Indiana's experience underscores how geography, mobility, and socioeconomic factors influence offender behavior and detection. Over time, the state has strengthened its investigative frameworks, adopting advanced forensic tools, consolidated databases, and improved coordination with neighboring jurisdictions. These measures reflect a broader nationwide shift toward more integrated and proactive criminal justice strategies. Louisiana. Louisiana ranks 7th on this list, with 6 known serial killers responsible for an estimated 344 victims. Although the number of offenders is comparable to Indiana, the total victim count reflects several contextual factors: concentrated poverty in certain regions, disparities in access to social services, and historically limited investigative resources in rural parishes. Louisiana's unique geography, characterized by wetlands, isolated communities, and complex transportation routes, has also influenced how certain cases unfolded, particularly before modern forensic systems and centralized databases were widely implemented. A major contributor to Louisiana's overall victim count is Samuel Little, considered by the FBI to be the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. Little confessed to 93 murders nationwide, with approximately 60 confirmed. A significant portion of these crimes occurred in Louisiana or involved victims connected to the state. Little targeted marginalized women, including those experiencing addiction, homelessness, or economic instability. His victim profile underscores a consistent theme in criminology. Offenders who prey on individuals with limited social support often operate longer without detection. Because many of Little's victims were never formally reported missing or lacked immediate family involvement, investigative momentum was frequently delayed, complicating later efforts to identify remains or link cases. Louisiana is also associated with Henry Lee Lucas, often referred to as the deadly drifter, though his infamously unreliable confessions complicate the historical record. Lucas traveled extensively throughout the South, and while only a fraction of his claims are verifiable, several of his confirmed crimes intersect with Louisiana. His case brought national attention to the challenges of differentiating genuine offender admissions from false or exaggerated statements, prompting reforms in interview protocols and verification methods. Another significant offender in Louisiana history is Ronald Joseph Dominique, known as the Bayou Strangler. Active primarily between 1997 and 2006, Dominique targeted men he encountered in economically distressed areas. His crimes occurred during a period when certain parishes were struggling with overstretched law enforcement resources, leading to slower pattern recognition. Dominique's case illustrates how disparities in policing capacity across jurisdictions can delay the identification of serial patterns, particularly when victims come from vulnerable populations. Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper, is strongly associated with Florida, but spent formative years in Louisiana and committed earlier offenses there. His trajectory demonstrates how mobility across state lines can obscure early behavioral indicators, making it difficult to identify escalating patterns until later, more severe crimes occur. Louisiana's cumulative experience with serial offenders highlights the intersection of socioeconomic vulnerability, geographic isolation, and evolving investigative capability. The state has since invested in improved forensic infrastructure, expanded DNA indexing, and more robust inter-parish communication. These advancements reflect an effort to close gaps that historically allowed offenders to operate without early intervention. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania ranks 8th on the list, with 5 documented serial killers connected to approximately 462 victims, placing it below Indiana and Louisiana in offender count, but surpassing both in total fatalities. This discrepancy highlights how a relatively small number of offenders can have a disproportionately large impact, depending on their methods, mobility, and the context in which they operated. Pennsylvania's criminal landscape spans major metropolitan areas like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, along with numerous smaller towns and rural communities. These varied environments present distinct investigative challenges, from densely populated neighborhoods with complex caseloads to remote regions where missing persons reports may be slower to emerge. One of the state's most examined offenders is Harvey Miguel Robinson, notable for being one of the youngest serial killers in modern American history. Robinson committed 3 murders and several violent assaults in the early 1990s, beginning his series of crimes when he was just 18 years old. His victims were all women whom he attacked in their homes, creating a climate of alarm in the community. Robinson's case is frequently analyzed in criminology for its illustration of early-onset violent offending. While most serial offenders begin their known trajectories later in life, Robinson exhibited characteristics such as escalating aggression and opportunistic violence far earlier. His eventual capture involved a coordinated police operation using a surviving victim whose cooperation helped law enforcement set a controlled engagement that led to Robinson being shot and apprehended. Another high-profile figure linked to Pennsylvania is Gary Heidnik, whose crimes in the 1980s drew national attention due to their extreme cruelty and the vulnerability of his victims. Heidnik targeted women from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, many of whom lacked strong support networks, making it more difficult for their disappearances to draw immediate investigative focus. His case remains a stark example of how offenders may exploit systemic inequalities and gaps in social safety structures. Pennsylvania is also